Over a year ago, I posted a video on how to run React and Express at the same time with a single command, and that video got there was a lot of really good comments on it, and everybody seemed to like it. So today I'm coming back with a full MERN stack behind a single command. You'll definitely want to see this one. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do before we get set up is going ahead and create our directory. So I'm in Visual Studio Code right now. I'm right here at the users directory and then my actual username. So from here, I'm just going to start by creating a directory called Easy MERN. And I'm just calling it this. You can call it whatever you want. But so we're going to first create that directory and then jump into it. Now at this point, we want to go ahead and create a new just basic node.js application. So npm init, and then we don't need any of this, so I'm just gonna enter straight through all that. Okay, and just to make sure that everything's there, yes, we have a package.json. Okay, and then from here, we want to create a couple more directories. So we're going to make dir source and cd into source, and then make dir server. Now keep in mind, we are eventually going to need basically a place to put our database configurations, a place to put our server, and a place to put our front end application. So keep in mind that all of those things have to exist, but they aren't necessarily all going to look the same. So far we have created package.json, that is our node application. We've created a folder called src or source. Once we cd into source, we have also created a server directory now. So from there, now the next point, we're kind of building out this directory structure. The next thing that we're going to do is install React, and to do that, we're going to use create React app, which is kind of just a single command React boilerplate to go ahead and create the entire application for us so that we don't have to deal with all of the other kind of nastier configuration underneath it. So npx create React app. Now, normally I would give this kind of an imaginative name or something like that for the application, but since this is essentially the client for the rest of our full stack application or the front end, I'm just going to call it client. Now, the reason that I'm doing this and the reason that I haven't already created a client folder is because create React app is actually going to create the folder for us and then put all of the React application inside that folder. So here, what I'm doing is kind of creating the folder for the rest of our application and creating the React application all at the same time. So gonna go ahead and let that run. Okay, so what I've done at this point is after create React app ran and created the new React application, I went ahead and opened the folder in Visual Studio Code. I don't know if you saw that before, but we were just basically just running with VS Code open, but the project or the folder wasn't open because we were creating it with the little terminal down here. So now that we have all of that, we can see that we have our package.json inside of our easy MERN folder or directory. There's nothing in server yet, and create React app actually went ahead and put the whole React application inside this client folder just like we wanted it to do. Now, the keen-eyed among you may notice something a little bit strange here. We have a package.json in our client directory, but we also have the package.json that we created inside of the easy MERN directory. This is on purpose. Just a little side note here, this whole creating a whole MERN stack behind a single command, this works excellent for a development environment. It's really convenient, especially if you kind of just want to bang something out real quick and get a proof of concept done. But this isn't necessarily how things would be configured in production. So it's okay for our purposes to have this kind of like dual package.json going on and that sort of thing, but I don't recommend deploying it this way. In the previous video, there were a couple of questions about that, so I wanted to make sure that I took a moment to be a little extra clear about it. It's okay to have them there, but just understand that that's what's going on. Okay, so at this point, we need to install some of the NPM applications that are going to handle a lot of our server configurations and functionality. So back in the easy MERN directory, that's going to be our root directory for the whole project here. we are going to npm install concurrently. This one is pretty key to making sure that everything works together and works together well. So that is that's a very important one. Also, we are going to globally install NodeMon. Now, I believe I already have it installed on this system, but I'm going to run the command again just to make sure and just so that you can see it happen. I apologize for the noise outside. There's some pretty bad weather going on right now. All right, so npm install tacg NodeMon. This package is pretty cool. This is NodeMon is what we're going to use for running our server. It's going to monitor the process that the server is running inside of. More on that later. All right, and then I'm gonna copy over everything else and just paste that in here. And this is just the rest of the packages that we need to kind of get everything running. Also, MongoDB is in here. We need that package to actually talk to the database in a little bit. So let's install MongoDB. So this is just the Mongo website. We're going to download community server. And let's see, Windows, just download the MSI. And then from here, it's pretty straightforward, just kind of a next. I just want to take a second to point out where I'm going to do complete. And I am installing MongoDB as a service. And then this is where the default data directory and the log directory are configured. I'm going to be using a different data directory, and later on, after this is installed, I go and manually find where MongoDB was installed to. Go through the rest of it. All right, and the install finished. Compass automatically came up. We don't need it just yet. And finish the install, and there we go, MongoDB is installed. Okay, so now that we have MongoDB installed, the next thing that we need to do is actually create a database and a collection inside of MongoDB. Now, since I'm running on Windows, I'm going to do this inside of Compass, and I've actually already done this. So I'm basically just going to show you what I have. Now, in order to connect to MongoDB when it's running locally on your machine with the default port and no craziness, is going to be localhost port 27017, and we're going to connect to it. And you can see here that I've already created a database called website, and then the first collection called sample store, and then I've also went ahead and put in some just kind of dummy extra data here just for something to read later on. I really like using Compass, especially for something like this, because we're not manually putting a whole bunch of data in, and it's just easy to do this instead of typing out a whole bunch of commands. Okay, so the next step of this, before we move on to beginning to configure our scripts and anything like that, first we want to make sure that we can run MongoDB from the terminal. That is key to making sure that all this works. And so even though I already have the script, in order to do that, I'm still going to walk you through it so that you can prove to yourself on your system how you can get this running before you get further along. So before we get into that, first let's make sure that we can actually start MongoDB from the command line. The first thing that you need to do is find the install directory for MongoDB. Now, I'm on Windows, so of course the defaults are going to be different, again, for the different operating systems that you're running on, but find that directory using a tool, or if you wrote it down in the middle of install, and this is when you're going to use it. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have that install path. I went ahead and copied it, so I'm going to paste it here. Now, keep in mind, we're going to do something a little bit different here. So I've actually pasted the path for the full executable. I'm going to back this up a bit to the bin directory. I'm going to keep the quotes around it so that we can cd into the directory. Again, we're only doing this to prove to ourselves that we can actually start the process. So cd into that directory, and then from here, I'm going to do /MongoD, and we should be able to start it. And we can see that we started Mongo, but it immediately quit. So the that's because what we were missing was we didn't configure the database path or the DB path. And this is where Mongo stores all of its data, not the logs, but all of where the actual data is going to be stored at. Now, there's also a data directory that is created inside of the installation process, but it has a long path on it as well. And the thing here is that we kind of already have this long path for our install directory, and it's a lot easier if we use a data directory that has a shorter path name. So what I've done is I have created another data directory close to the root of C, just called Mongo Data. So out of here, go ahead and go create that directory, and when you've done that, come back to this point. But just to prove to you that I have it, we can CD into it, and then we can also CD right back to where we were. Okay, so now we can start the Mongo process again, but this time we're going to configure the DB path variable. So /MongoD --DB path, and then now we're going to type out our data directory, which is right here, C:\mongo data, and we should be able to start it. And we can see now that MongoDB, the process starts, and it didn't immediately exit, it didn't immediately fail out because we configured the DB path. So now the database is running and it has somewhere to put all of the data. So we're good. We've proved to ourselves that we can start MongoDB from the command line. Okay, this means that our proof of concept works, and we should be able to put everything back together and get it all working the way that it's supposed to be. Okay, so I've switched back to our project directory, and so now we can configure and hook up the rest of our project, especially now that we know that we can run MongoDB from the terminal. Okay, so what we're going to do is the first thing is we're going to go to the package.json file for our client side project. So this is for the React project. Now, this may seem a little bit weird, but we're going to come up here and configure a proxy. What this proxy is doing is this is going to make sure that our front end project can actually talk to the server. So this is standing up basically a web proxy to sit between the front end and the back end of our application. Keep in mind, again, like I said before, this is great for a development environment, kind of spinning something up, getting it running. This is not ideal for production. That's part of that is because here we've hard-coded a URL, and the other thing to note here is that this port number that we've given, I've just given it 5500 because I know it's not going to collide with anything else. Okay, so in the package.json for your React app, go ahead and configure this proxy. Very, very important. So now that we have that, we should be done with the front end application, and we're going to switch over to the server because remember, our server still isn't built out too much. So we're going to close that, get to our server, and down here in the terminal, we're actually going to CD into source and then server. And from server, we are going to create 3 files. Okay, so the first file that we're going to create is server. This is where the main entry point for our server is going to live. Then we are going to create routes.js. This is where our application or our API routes is going to live. And then we're also going to create db.js. This is where our database configuration is going to live. So for now, we're going to switch over to server. I'm going to copy and paste the code in because explaining every single line of code is outside the scope of this video. This is really more about configuring all these things together. If you want a deeper explanation of what's happening here, comment down below. Also, don't forget to hit that like button. But yeah, comment down below if you have any questions, or feel free to Google research. If anything doesn't look right, definitely ask me about it, or maybe if there's enough questions, I'll do a complete video later on explaining things. But for now, we're just going to copy paste the code into here. Okay, and so really quickly, what this does for our server is that we're pulling in our dependencies, we're setting up Express here a little bit. Remember, this is the port that our server is running on, port 5500. It's the same port configuration as we set on the proxy in our client side for the React application. Remember, those two ports must be the same. We're then pulling in routes and DB, and we're initializing the database and then initializing the routes and making sure that our server is actually going to listen on the port that we configured it on. Okay, so moving on to the database configuration. Here we are pulling in more dependencies for Mongo. This is the actual dependency for Mongo client. This is our connection string to talk to MongoDB. Remember, we said we're just using the default configuration here, so it's just the default port and localhost website. This is the name of the database that we set up inside of Mongo Compass. So if you used a different name for your database, make sure that you change it accordingly. But I just use the name website. Here we actually use the package and the connection string to actually make a connection to the database server. And then we host our database behind this promise, and this is where we are returning that promise back into the server so that we can actually talk to the database. This right here, keep an eye on that because we'll be using that later on, that key right there. Okay, and the last part is setting up the routes. So this is essentially the express routes that really is the entry point into for the client to communicate with our server. Here we just have one route. If you wanted more, you could come down here and say app.get, and you could do another route like that. But for now, we just have the one route because it proves, or it's going to prove, that is all the communication that we have to show that this actually the data actually does move back and forth. So we have API get data. Here, remember, cite data. So that is the key. That key value. It seems like it's coming from nowhere, but it's actually coming from right here back in the database file. If you can't quite see how all those connections are made, start here, trace it back, you'll see where it comes from. So DBS cite data, we look into the collection, sample store. The reason I'm walking through this is to show you that this is the name of the collection that we configured inside of Mongo Compass. So whenever you configure your database and your collection from MongoDB back when we installed it, whether you did that from the command line or from Compass or from some completely different Mongo client, your database name is going to go here in your connection string, and your collection name is going to go right here in the routes file underneath the collection. And then we're going to basically just kind of like a select star in SQL, select everything and return it. Okay, so that's what we have to set up the backend for our server and our database, and we should be able to have some functionality there now. All right, so this is the next most important part after having concurrently a NodeMon and everything else installed. We're actually going to configure the scripts that wires everything together. So in the script section, and keep in mind, we are in the package.json that's in the root of our application. So not the package.json for the React app. No, the package.json for the whole application. This package.json is far enough close to the root of our application to be able to talk to the server and the client. So that's why we're using this one. So the first thing that we're going to do is set up a dev script. And this is the script that's going to kick off everything else. So the first thing that we're going to do is you call out to concurrently. We're going to give it the kill others option. We'll talk about this option in just a second, but for now, let's kind of just go on. The next thing that we're going to do is say npm run server. Now, instead of just putting all of our commands to run all of our things right here, just like this, instead what we have to do is we have to wrap them in quotes. But since we already have the entire script in double quotes, we have to escape those like so. So we can say npm run server. We can say npm run start, npm run client, if I could type. And then we're also going to say npm run db. All right, so now all that we need to do is actually configure the server, client, and DB scripts. So let's go ahead and just kind of start these out this way. All right, so now that we have the placeholders there, let's go ahead and configure the server script. For these next scripts, until we get to the database one, they're a bit shorter. So what we're going to do is just copy paste them. You can feel free to type them out, but since I kind of already have them in some notes off to the side, I'm just going to copy paste them. So what we're doing from here is we're CDing, or we're changing directories into our source directory and then into our server directory. And then we're attaching the a second command to use nodemon to start server.js. Now, the reason that we're doing this is because if server.js has any file changes as we're developing it, we want to know about those file changes so that we can have it, so that our server can be automatically restarted without us having to be working in it, change the file, and then have to come kill everything and start it back up. Nodemon handles that for us. But it does that without the process actually dying with an error code. Now, what that brings in is why I put the kill others option here for concurrently. So concurrently now is configured with 3 essentially processes once everything is running. If any one of these processes fails with an error code or dies or something happens and it's just no longer there, what this kill others option does is it monitors every single process that we have configured for concurrently. If any one of them dies, then it goes ahead and kills everything. So if your database or your server or your client actually fails completely, the whole thing stops. This might seem heavy-handed, but you really don't want to be working in the server or in the client and things silently die, and then you wonder why things aren't updating and you have to, So I like this isn't necessary, but I like keeping this here for a little bit of convenience. All right, so moving on to the client script. So the client script is pretty much the same thing as our server script. We CD into source, and then we're going to CD into client, and then we're going to just npm start. And npm start, that is referencing the start script over here in the package.json for the client React application. This npm start is running from the context of our client directory, and so this npm command is going to be talking inside of this package.json to this start script, and that's what's going to start React. If that was a bit confusing, feel free to stop the video or kind of go back, watch this a couple of times. Or what I like to do is sometimes if things really aren't clear, go ahead and play around and change this to different directories and see what's going to happen with it. Sometimes that helps as well. All right, now the DB script for the database. So this database script is following a little bit of the pattern that we've been doing here. So we change directories into our install directory, and then we're using the double ampersand to tack on another command. So since we have CD'd into the install directory for Mongo, then the next command that we're going to run is, now remember, we have to configure the DB path or the data directory for Mongo whenever we run it from the CLI. So we say .mongod, we've escaped our backslash, so we need a double backslash, DB path, and then we give it the full path to our data directory, which for us is c/mongo data, again with a double backslash to escape them. All of this is all that's needed to run MongoDB from the terminal inside of npm, and then concurrently is running all 3 of these things. So with this configuration right here, in addition to the convenience that NodeMon gives us, in addition to the proxy that was configured inside of the client side package.json. All of those things should come together to make sure that we can run the server, the React application, and MongoDB all at the same time with a single command inside of our dev environment. Okay, so I'm back to the root of our application, and we should be able to say npm run dev, and if this works correctly, everything should run, and we should be able to see the output from everything right here. So there we go. Nothing seems to be dying. We're starting a development server. We see output from React that it's starting on localhost 3000. And there we go. Okay, so React has started. Now let's make sure that everything is running. First, we can see that React has some output in our terminal. Mongo dumped a whole bunch. And then also our server started. So that is enough to tell us that everything has started and should be running all accordingly. Okay, now the next part is to make sure that we can actually talk to the server and talk to the database and bring data back to the client and serve that data up here in the browser. So this is the kind of the default code that React gives us. We really don't want that because it doesn't do a whole lot for us. So we're going to dial down here into our React application, and we're going to basically cut out just about all of this. I will leave a single H2 just to show that things are actually running correctly. So app test, yeah, we're getting things rendered back out to the browser. I've got some things that are already built out. Again, I'm going to copy and paste them over just to save time. If you have any questions about the code that I'm putting in, not all of it is the cleanest. I'll just go ahead and admit that now. But if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below asking questions. And if there's enough, I'll do another video explaining the client side configuration and the client side code for what's going on here. All right, we don't need this logo, and we're going to be using a little bit of state with React hooks. And so what we have now is we have a place to store data once it comes back to the client. That's what this hook is for using state. And I'm just giving these things generic names. So some data, we have a single function here that is going to call our server using the fetch API. It's going to call out to API get data. Remember, that comes directly from our routes folder, or our routes file that we set up whenever we configured our backend. Then we're going to pull in that data, display it out in the console of the browser just to show that it's there, and then we're going to set the data in our state hook so that down here our component actually has access to that data and can render it and do what it needs to do. And down here I've put a little bit of display code. This is the ugly part. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments. And I've configured a button here that just has a click handler, and when you click it, it calls the server function, or calls the call server function that we set up here. Okay. And then, so I'll make this a little bit bigger. The database returned this value, some value, and that came back up through the Express server back to React. That was responded here, and then we set the data using a React hook, and then from there we displayed it in the browser using a little bit of this display logic right here. And so that is how you run Mongo, Express, React, and Node.js all inside the same dev environment, all hidden behind the same single command. All right, I hope you liked this video. I know it was a bit long, and it's been a while since I've posted another full stack MERN development environment video. But if you liked it, please go ahead and give this video a like. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you see a way that this could be quicker or more convenient or anything like that, also feel free to check out the Git repo, also listed down in the comments. If you have any other ideas that you want to see me put together, feel free to let me know about that as well. Until next time, keep building.